sports cards. Perception is reality. Let's discuss. When I'm talking about perception as reality, really I'm thinking about this from a kind of a value of cards kind of way, or of what is considered iconic kind of way. You know, I find it so fascinating that there's no objective reality when it comes to sports card values. You know, a lot of people will say things like, oh, that player is undervalued, that player is overvalued. There's really no such thing. In my mind, like, the cards themselves have no intrinsic inherent value. It's this perception that we give them that give them this value. And I find this to be really interesting because when you're trying to identify, a lot of people, when they're trying to identify sports card plays, they look at the math of it. They look at, you know, market movers and these kinds of things. And those are useful tools. But the tools like Card Hedger, which there's a link in the description if you want to sign up for an account, they're more like tools to try to understand perception. Data analysis, it has limitations in this space. You know, when you're looking to analyze how a business is doing, if you want to invest in a business, you can look at concrete numbers and see like the market shifting or whatever, and understand different market forces to understand if something is going to do well. But in the realm of sports cards, it's more about perception, trying to understand how perception is going to change. So, you know, you don't know, it doesn't matter, you know, the numbers behind a player, you know, if they're doing better or if they're doing worse, or if this card is more rare or this card is less or more common. Those things don't matter as much as what are the forces that cause people to think about it in a different way, what changes perception, and that's what's going to change value. And that's a different thing. You know, I've talked about in past videos how sometimes, you know, like a gold card numbered out of 10 or 50 can sell for more than like a green numbered out of 5 or some you know, red whatever numbered out of 8, because, you know, the gold card is perceived as unique and special in some way, even though it's slightly more common than those other things. It's all about perception. It's about the value placed on the aesthetics of that specific card. It's not based on any kind of data or objective reality. It's just based on a perception and a feeling that people have. Or when people say that certain players' cards are undervalued or overvalued, it's based on their perception of that player and what they think should be the popularity level of that player, not what the actual popularity level of that player is. You know, like Zion Williamson's cards, you know, his cards for such a long time were so expensive, and it's because there was this general feel that his cards, that he was something special, that he was perceived to be this iconic kind of person for the long term. And that perception held for a long time despite the realities that were there, especially the constant injuries. He's a great player, but even with all of those things that were real, you know, the fact that he has trouble staying on the court, his values for the longest time stayed really, really high. Part of that was probably artificial, you know, people trying to keep the values up because they had invested a lot into it. But part of that is because there was also this just general perception that he was going to be this special person. And then at some point, it reached a tipping point of too many injuries, and then it started to like collapse the other way. And once that tipping point is reached and a few people start to have a different perception about him and his cards, then suddenly the whole dam collapses and the whole thing falls over, because just perception had gotten to a point where there was enough kind of thought that the direction was going to go the other way, that it was going to be negative, that it did, and then the perception became the reality. It wasn't because of some difference in his play. It was because of enough perception change to cause the whole thing to change. And that happens again and again in sports cards. It doesn't matter the realities of things. You know, in my collection size, I collect what I want to collect. In my trying to make money side, I try to find good deals, things that I can buy now and sell immediately, or sell, you know, I'm not waiting for the value to change. You know, that's kind of my approach is arbitrage more than investment. If you're doing something quickly, you just see this is the value right now, try to sell it also right now, so you're not waiting for perception to come in and change the card's value too drastically. You're trying to make moves more quickly. Part of the reason I do this is because I don't trust that the perception of things, the perception of values, is based on anything. It's impossible to read. It's impossible to know where things are going to go, even if you read the data analysis of the past and everything, because that's just telling you where the perception has been. It's not telling you much of anything about where the perception is going to go later. because it doesn't work the same as other like market systems where the supply and demand is pretty easy to tell. I mean, you can tell based on how many oranges have been eaten, how many oranges are probably going to be eaten in the future. Maybe there'll be a little bit less demand or a little bit more supply. You can read that and you can get a sense of where the value of oranges are going to be based on those kind of objective realities. Sports cards isn't like that. Sports cards is based on a perception, and it's impossible to tap into what that perception is going to be or what are the things that are going to cause that perception to change. You could have somebody who's been playing the same forever, but for whatever reason, something happens that changes perception. Ja Morant, I mean, his values skyrocketed. These couple of things happen that change perception about him, and everything changes with his cards. Trae Young has this, his cards go up in value, and then he has one bad off season, and then his perception completely changes, and now his cards are, he would have to do so extremely well for his cards to go up again. Something happened that changed perception, and in order for that perception to be changed again, it has to be a dramatic thing, because it has to be a tipping point. It has to be something that changes perception at the level of the casual fan, because a really close observer of the NBA, for example, will look at somebody like Jaren Jackson Jr. and see like, wow, his cards are really undervalued. He's a phenomenal player, and he's extremely good. But what is it that would require perception about him to change in a wider scale so that even the average casual fan would say, whoa, like that guy, his cards should be worth a lot more. What is the thing that causes that perception to change? It's impossible to know. And that's why, I find sports cards to be such a fascinating thing. It's all about like exploring the psychology of the collector and the psychology of the flipper to try to understand what are the things that people value and what are the things that people will actually put their time and their energy and their money into, and then to make some decisions based on those realities. I don't think any of us can do that perfectly, and that's one of the reasons why the sports card space is both so much fun and also like if you're really trying to make money in this space, there's certainly possibilities, but there's also so many unknowns and there's so many things that are just hard to read. That's why I think like when I'm thinking about like the money making aspects of sports cards, the word arbitrage I think is the most important one for me in my approach, because I think that's the one that kind of avoids going through the ups and downs of perception too much. So anyway, I just wanted to share this video. It's getting into the psychology and the philosophy of this, but it's fun to reflect on these sorts of things. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed the video. Let me know what your thoughts are in the comments below. Peace.